The Russell Wilson visit happened. And now the question is, will he sign with the Steelers? We'll talk about that. What are the good things? What are the bad things? All the angles of that, as well as Mock Draft Monday here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, here with Jenna Harner today. Let's get into it.
You are Locked On Steelers, your daily Pittsburgh Steelers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm your host, Chris Carter, bringing you your daily dose of all things of the Pittsburgh Steelers. As always, you can find the show on your favorite podcasting apps and on YouTube. Like this video if you enjoy it. Subscribe to this YouTube channel to get all of your daily Monday through Friday episodes as well as our bonus content. We thank you for making us your first listen every day because we're your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more right now. New customers get $150 back in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's actually $200 now with March Madness coming. So if your bet wins, go to FanDuel.com/LockedOn today to get started. As I said before, we're joined by none other than Jenna Harner. She's back on the show. Jenna, I think this might be the first ever Monday show I've ever had you on. We're making history here.
I'm so honored to be a part of it. It's just, I'm trying to bring the same energy that I bring for Fridays on Mondays. So we're still hype. We're going into the week, starting off on a strong note, just glad to be here.
Well, the Steelers certainly have a strong note to start off with this week. They had that long meeting supposedly with Russell Wilson, reports from Josina Anderson and people around the NFL saying that both sides seem to appreciate each other. Both sides seem to respect each other. It was a long meeting where both sides were talking to things. Arthur Smith was talking to Russell Wilson. Mike Tomlin was talking to Russell Wilson. And Russell Wilson was gauging his interest in the Steelers. Now, we do understand that he also has a visit with the Giants and the Raiders. And I think there's one other team on top of that. But you look at those situations and you have to wonder, do the Steelers sit in a position right now where signing Russell Wilson makes as much sense for them as it does for him? He says he wants to go somewhere he can win. He won't be an expensive guy because of the $39 million he's owed from the Broncos. And he's said, I'll take whatever contract I want that you want to give me right now. But the Steelers, there's some people out there that think that Russell Wilson is a locker room cancer, that he's a divider of teams. Jenna, where do you see the situation standing right now? And do you think it's likely he becomes the Steelers' signed quarterback?
Well, this is so intriguing to me for so many ways, because I think first and foremost, this is exactly what Omar Khan and what the Steelers front office said that they were going to do. I mean, Omar said in his session at the Combine with you guys, with the local print reporters, he said this to the national media at the Combine. He said this to myself when I spoke one-on-one with him last week. They're going to do their due diligence in exploring all of the options. So at face value, that's exactly what this is here. The Steelers are doing exactly what they need to be. They're bringing in Russell Wilson to have these conversations, to kind of feel things out a little bit, see if, this is going to be a solid fit for both sides. To me, though, I just, and maybe I'm kind of on my own little island with this take, I don't entirely see this as a fit based on what they've been saying about Kenny Pickett. And yes, there are maybe some things behind closed doors that obviously we don't know. But to me, if you bring in Russell Wilson, I just feel like this is almost like, sorry, Kenny kind of thing, because the reality of the situation is there's going to be a quarterback competition, and you'd like to think, just based on experience alone, that Russell Wilson is the more experienced quarterback. He's going to be able to have a little bit more of an upper hand in that competition. Granted, we haven't seen Kenny Pickett play in a while. We haven't seen what he's been doing this offseason up to this point. But to me, it just feels almost like I feel like a lot of people, and understandably so, because of the frustrations that they've had with this quarterback room, are like jumping at any other option besides Kenny Pickett right now. We saw that reaction when obviously Mason played as well as he did. But to me, it's just like, pump the brakes a little bit here. I just don't entirely see if he is going to be this guy because of all the things that we've heard in terms of what this front office wants to do, all the opportunities they want to give Kenny Pickett based on, again, what we've heard from them.
I agree with the sentiment here that it certainly, if you're going to, like the Steelers said, they're going to challenge Kenny Pickett. Yeah. This is a heck of a challenger, a 9-time Pro Bowl, Super Bowl champion quarterback. Yes, he's 36 this season, but he still brings a lot to the table. And I want to say this too, for all the people that are saying, why even get Russell Wilson's washed? He's done. He's cooked. And look, Russell Wilson, I don't think is the Russell Wilson of 6 or 7 years ago when they were winning Super Bowls in Seattle. But you look at his numbers last year in a bad situation in Denver, 26 touchdowns, 8 interceptions, a passer rating of 98. He averaged 204.7 yards per game. In what the Steelers are going to ask of their quarterback, which again has been the whole point about Kenny Pickett, you're not asking him to do a lot. Russell Wilson fitting that bill makes a lot of sense, especially when you start to dig into other numbers that he has. Russell Wilson, you're not going to ask him to throw deep a whole lot, but last year when he threw deep, very limited amount, only threw 60 times, completed about 23 of those, but 6 touchdowns, 1 interception on deep passes, on medium passes, 11 touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Also, maybe his most impressive number, red zone passing last year. You look at how he played in 2023. He threw 20 touchdowns to 1 interception in red zone stats, according to Fantasy Pros. So you're looking at a guy who, yeah, he's not the same magic Russell Wilson that pulls rabbits out of hats that he did in his time in Seattle. But guess what? He's still an NFL quarterback who can be efficient. And to me, Jenna, and this is where I think could be the extreme of, Kenny, we are testing you. If I'm the Steelers, I'm saying, look, we believe in you, but we believe in you to be able to beat a guy like this.
Yeah.
And that to me is the ultimate challenge here is Kenny Pickett. If Kenny Pickett beats out Russell Wilson and proves that he's the Steelers' best quarterback, it's a heck of a story in his career. And I think it kind of sets to the side, hey, look, everyone said he's not an NFL starting quarterback. He beat that guy. That means he's an NFL starting quarterback.
Yeah, no, that's actually a really great point. I haven't heard that side or that part of it because that does make a ton of sense. I just keep going back to the fact that does Russell Wilson want to go to a place where there's potentially a likely chance he could be a backup? Because I know there's a bunch of dominoes that need to fall in terms of when, what other big free agent quarterbacks are going to go places. And a lot of it starts with Kirk Cousins and the decision that he eventually will go on to make. But to me, there are other fits, other teams that have better fits for Russell Wilson, including the New York Football Giants, because, they have said the frustrations with Daniel Jones aren't any secret. But to me, I like that point. I just don't know if realistically we're going to go to training camp and Russell Wilson is going to be one of the quarterbacks on this roster. But at the same time, for the Steelers, you do need to win football games because of the fact, and this is like, I know we talked about this towards the end of the season, but the fact that TJ Watt has not won a playoff game in his professional career, we talk about windows all the time, like that window is closing a little bit. So if the Steelers do feel like, hey, this is going to be our shot here, this is going to be our opportunity. I just also, though, I don't feel like this team is a quarterback away. If you were, I would say, hey, absolutely, Russell Wilson, go bring in a guy that can at least be in there and compete. But I think this team needs so much more than that, unfortunately, right now. I also want to go back a little bit too. When I was speaking with Omar Khan earlier this week, he had this excitement you could see in him when he was talking about how Kenny is going to work with Arthur Smith's offense. He mentioned it 3 or 4 times, and there were times where we were talking about other things, and he kind of went back to that point. And he basically wanted to say, we're really excited to see how Arthur's going to utilize Kenny and the ways in which he's going to be able to bring the best out of Kenny, things in that vein. And that to me was another sign that I'm like, okay, they have this confidence in Kenny, but at the same time, they are going to do everything they can to challenge him. And also maybe too, Kenny Pickett's not there's no way he isn't hearing this news, no matter what. Right. Whether he's not on social media, whatever it is, he's hearing the fact that the Steelers are having a meeting with Russell Wilson. So what does that do for him internally? How much of a challenge does just that pose in itself right there?
It's a major question. And I think the thing here is that the Steelers, if I'm the Steelers, there's the line of, I want to push my quarterback. I want to challenge this guy and see how he responds to that challenge. Because and one thing I've said this before, when people say, what about Kenny Pickett's feelings? I'm like, look, if Kenny Pickett can't handle the pressure of someone coming in to challenge him for his job, what do you think how do you think he's going to handle the pressure when a game's on the line in a big moment? Now, here's the thing. This is why I think he'll handle it well, because he's handled late games so well so many times. And I think Kenny Pickett is mature enough to handle this situation. And even if they did sign Russell Wilson, be like, all right, guess what? I'm going to beat that guy in camp. And if he doesn't, he'll work until he does. I think that this is, if this happens, it is not a giant smudge on the Steelers' plans. I think it's an acknowledgement. Hey, Kenny, you got to be better. We think you can be better, but if you're not, there's someone here that's going to push you to make sure that you are, or take your job if you're not ready for that. And that's reasonable. And the other thing here is they're not trading picks to get him like they would have to for Justin Fields. They're not committing a whole lot of money to him because, like they said, this contract with the Broncos. All of that makes sense. But to your point too, does Russell Wilson want this? That's going to be a big question too. Like you said, Kenny Pickett's obvious competition for him. His competition if he goes to the Raiders is Aiden O'Connell.
That's his competition if he goes to the Giants is Daniel Jones. Like and that's exactly how I feel. Also too, and this is just the way that my brain takes things like one step further, how much of this is also pressure on Mason Rudolph to potentially be like, oh shoot, here, maybe I do need to sign. Whatever offers on the table because of, again, the domino effect of all this. But again, there's things that we don't know are happening behind closed doors, but you wonder how much, if any, plays into all of this too.
Absolutely. I want to talk more about free agency outside of the quarterback side of things. We'll keep you up to date to see what happens with Russell Wilson and all things here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Stick with us. We'll be right back with that and Mock Draft Monday, so don't go anywhere. We still got a lot to discuss today. But first, we'll remind you that today's episode is brought to you by eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. That's what brings home the winning trophy, and it's also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers to roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts that you need at the prices that you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay's Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast, Chris Carter here with Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI in Pittsburgh. Jenna, let's switch to free agency. Now, I recorded my Friday episode pretty early on Thursday when we heard the Russell Wilson news. We had to get that out. Wanted to get that done. Plus, we had a big weekend coming up. And then all the news started to happen. Patrick Peterson is released. Allen Robinson is released. And now with those moves, two of the moves that we thought were some of the most obvious, clear cap space with guys that probably aren't going to do too well for you and earn that cap space in 2024. Now, all of a sudden, the Steelers have approximately $28 to $29 million in cap space, and that's still without any extension with void years on Cam Hayward, any restructuring of TJ Watt or Minkah Fitzpatrick or Alex Highsmith or any of their big money guys, or letting go other guys that they could still clear space with, like DeMonte KZ. You know, there's other moves to still be had here if the Steelers really want to create more cap space, and considerably more cap space. But even so, we're talking about close to $30 million in cap space for the Steelers to operate, and they have plenty of needs. Do you see this as a year where maybe they go after one of the big splash players, or do they try to spread this evenly out and try to just get solid veterans to kind of just solidify the depth chart across the board?
I really feel like we're going to kind of see Omar Khan do almost identical to what he did last year. Maybe a couple more wrinkles thrown in there, maybe one or two more like, ooh, this is a nice, like, intriguing, slight reach to get a player, not in terms of money, but just someone they wouldn't normally go for. Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but the way that the Steelers have usually operated, and especially in the Kevin Colbert days, was free agency wasn't as big of a thing. They weren't going out and getting these big targets. Right. They weren't bringing in a bunch of guys. And last year, not by any means was what Omar Khan did, these massive signings with all these big guys, but you went out, you got a couple notable guys to fill holes that you needed. And I think that that's exactly what we're going to see in how he operates, how Omar Khan and how this front office operates come, later today when the legal tampering period starts, and obviously on Wednesday when everybody can officially sign. I think we're going to see, like, hey, this team needs some help at safety. This team needs a cornerback. This team needs some interior linebackers. There I was going with that. You need all of these positions. So I think we're going to see some, not crazy veteran. I don't think we're not going to see the likes of, however old Patrick Peterson, anything like that. We're going to see a little bit younger, I like to think, not insanely younger, but like in the middle range where it's like, hey, this guy's getting up there, but he's not quite, over the hill yet. But I do think that they're going to bring in guys to fill some of those gaps, but also at the same time, the positions of need that this team needs are also play very well into this draft class, into how, especially again, deep the cornerback class is, deep center is. But at the same time, and I had said this the second the Bills released Mitch Morse, I had said, really interesting fit for the Steelers here. And we obviously know that he met with the Steelers as well late last week. So I think that they're going to obviously look to fill some of the needs that they have, especially with some veteran guys, not like, again, high veteran, but I think that that's where Omar Khan and where they're going to go.
I'm with you on this, is that they're going to try to find solid additions who can be really good contributors, but none of the superstars. Like even some of the superstars that people thought were on the board, L'Jarius Sneed, Jalen Johnson, Chris Jones, all of those guys are gone. Well, I guess technically L'Jarius Sneed can still be traded from the Chiefs, and to pick up that franchise tag situation that they've gotten there. But even still, like a guy like Kendall Fuller, who's probably going to cost you around $10+ million a year, that might not be the move as much as, say, finding a corner who costs you maybe $5 to $6 million a year, maybe a Keijon Nixon from the Packers, who's more of a slot corner, and he costs you maybe $4 to $5 million a year, and he brings a lot of experience, and he's 26, 27 years old. That's the range I think that you're talking about there, Jenna. And same thing goes for safety. They got guys, a Pitt guy, Jordan Whitehead. He's out there. He could be had for around $5, $6, $7 million a year in that situation. Other guys like Julian Blackmon, who I've talked about on the show before. Center could be tricky. Lloyd Cushenberry is probably the big one, but he's probably going to be an expensive center. So if you look at that situation, that could be a challenge that the Steelers seem like, you know what, this might not be the best time to invest big at center there, especially if they want to go at it in the draft. But that doesn't mean that they won't look at other centers, because there are other centers available in this free agency period. Aaron Brewer, with just a former Titan, went undrafted, is now 26 years old, played pretty decently this past season. Coleman Shelton from the Rams is another name that's out there. There's guys that they can definitely bring in. An Andre James from the Raiders. It's just gonna be a question as far as how much do they want to invest in it in free agency, and then if they do invest in free agency, if they get a starter capable guy, I think it takes center off the top of the draft boards for like the Zach Frazier's, the Jackson Powers Johnsons, and now you're starting to look at maybe drafting like a Bo Limmer out of Arkansas, maybe the 3rd or 4th round if you're the Pittsburgh Steelers.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with this. Because again, I don't think it's going to be these crazy big spendings, but like a lot of like, hey, this guy's going to cost us $4.5 million. This guy we're spending $6 million on. Like they're going to round out the room in those types of ways. But just based on how we've seen Omar Khan operate, and I don't think it's going to be, again, this grand but just this grand spectacle by any means where it's like, oh my God, the Steelers got this big guy. But in reality, they do have a lot of needs to fill right now based on just a lot of the moves that we saw them make. And Omar Khan is going to attack these moves and bring these guys in a variety of different ways. But I do think there's going to be 3, 4, 5 guys we hear the Steelers, bring in and are going to be signing later this week that are going to fill out the room in the ways that they need them to.
Certainly. And again, it's going to be about finding guys that are veterans that fit the room, that understand what their role is. And we've seen them get burned before with guys like Melvin Ingram, who came in and, wanted to start. And when he got overtaken by Alex Highsmith, he didn't want to be around anymore. The Steelers don't want guys like that. They want guys that understand what they're coming in to do, whether they're starting a center or being a backup linebacker. That's the other thing. Linebacker is another position that they can look at. And I think that's the other thing here, Jenna, and part of what you were talking about with the Kevin Colbert, style. The reason that they kind of spread the money out, they don't go buck wild with one position, is because they want to go into the draft feeling comfortable at every position group to say, like, hey, if we don't get a 1st round pick in this group, we're not killing ourselves right now. And there's years that they've done that, and they've led up ending up with guys like Jarvis Jones and Artie Burns.
Yeah.
And so, and for those who don't know Steelers draft history, those were busts. So
Not great.
You want to put yourself in a position where you can just take the best player available that you see on the board and say, hey, that guy's going to help us win no matter what. We may have thought, well, you know what, this is a great year to get an outside corner, but we got this free agent. We got Joey Porter Jr. We're going to rock with that, and we're going to hope that holds out, and maybe we'll get a guy in the second, third, or fourth round that can fit that bill. That's where the Steelers want to be. I think that's where this approach is going to get them, and you can still get your better players by doing that. For example, go and look at how they got Isaac Seumalo, their best offensive lineman last year. They picked him up, and he was a huge addition. And he wasn't a bank breaking signing. He's gonna cost you about $10.1 million in salary cap this year. But that's a solid signing. You go back to James Daniels the year before. They've done this where they've gotten like one good veteran who's not a superstar, but isn't a reject either. Like, he's a player that the former fan base of the team that watched him was like, oh man, I can't believe we lost that guy. Yep. That's the person that they're looking for right now.
Absolutely. And I think too, something that can also be said with all of this is the Mike Tomlin effect, because every free agent I feel like we've talked to over the last handful of years, most notably Patrick Peterson, Allen Robinson, these guys have come in and said, one of the biggest reasons I wanted to come to this team was because I wanted to play for Mike Tomlin. You go back to, 2 weeks ago when the NFLPA report cards were released, and Tomlin has the 5th highest grade among all coaches in the NFL based on 77% of the players voting and taking this survey. Like, that's a big factor in all of this too, is that yes, the Steelers have not had the winning success as of late that they've been known for, in their history, in their franchise. But at the same time, you can't take away how Mike Tomlin is as a head coach and what so many of these players, what it means to them to be able to play for a guy like him.
It's certainly a big factor. It's worked in the Steelers' favor before. We'll see if it works in their favor again. But after free agency comes the draft, and because it's Monday, we got to do our mock draft Monday segment. We'll do that here with Jenna right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast right after this. But first, we'll remind you this show is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, the #1 sportsbook in America. Say goodbye to busted brackets, because FanDuel lets you bet on every game of March Madness, whether you're betting on a big upset on a 1 seed or it's time to go dancing on America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, you can take advantage of all sorts of deals, all sorts of opportunities on FanDuel Sportsbook, getting ready for March Madness. It's conference tournament weekend. I'm actually after recording this, I'm headed to DC to cover the ACC tournament as Pitt tries to make its run to the ACC championship and prove it deserves a ticket to March Madness. But if you want to take advantage of this on FanDuel, right now you can get $200 back in bonus bets if you hit on your first $5 bet to win. That's $200 you can use on point spreads, money lines, or even pick who's going to win it all. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and bet on college hoops until they cut down the nets. Again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon for new customers to get $200 back in bonus bets if your first bet of $5 or more wins. And that's on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. We're back here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. I'm Chris Carter here with Jenna Harner of Channel 11 WPXI. It's time for our Mock Draft Monday segment. As always, I post out on the weekends. Sometimes I'd apologize, it doesn't go up on Friday or right early Saturday. Sometimes it goes up late Saturday like it did this week. But you all always submit it. But I set a post. I said, hey, on my Twitter at Carter Critiques or in the Locked On Steelers Facebook group, and say, hey, if you want to have a chance to get your picks on the Mock Draft Monday segment, you submit here. And here's the rules. This week's rules was you had to make sure, no matter what happened, that you got an offensive tackle in the first round of this draft. But there were no limits on trades, so y'all could do whatever y'all wanted with that. I've had a lot of trade limit rules in here because some of y'all like to get crazy. But we had some very interesting submissions this week, Jenna. And this week's winner, I think, brings up some interesting choices here that fit the Steelers' needs. This one is Greg Steinley, who won this week. Congratulations, Greg. I like your set of picks here. Greg also traded a little bit here, moved down in the first round with the Philadelphia Eagles to get back two spots, picked up an extra third-round pick, and then used that third-round pick they traded to get that to move up in the third round pick by trading away a fourth. So getting a pick to give up a pick and kind of move up. Interesting move there to get 2 third rounders instead of 2 fourth rounders. But with all that being said, Greg's first pick was in my opinion, a knockout pick of J.C. Latham. J.C. Latham is one of my favorite tackles out of Alabama. He's big, he's strong, he's a right tackle, he's a dog. He's going to be that guy. And I think that he can be a guy there. Now, the question I have is, will J.C. Latham actually be there at 20, let alone 22, where Greg traded back and got him? That'll be interesting to see. I don't know, Jenna, but J.C. Latham is big. He's physical. Him and Broderick Jones would pose as just massive tackles to set the tone at the line of scrimmage for the Steelers for years to come.
And that's exactly how we know that this front office wants to build this team, especially with this new offense under Arthur Smith. They want to be intense, physical, tough, beyond just like battle of wills. Mike Tomlin loves the mano-a-mano thing. My guy is going to beat your guy in the trenches. We're going to run the ball well. This is no secret that this is the identity the Steelers want to have. I love that pick. I'm just also with you. I just don't know if he's going to actually be there at 22.
Yeah, I don't know either. I think that J.C. Latham, and I've seen some people that have him as the number 2 tackle in this class over guys like Olu Fashanu from Penn State. I don't know if that's really the case, but we'll actually see if it plays out that way. But in my book, he's at least the 3rd best tackle in this class. And I don't know if he lasts to 22, but if he does, sprint to the podium, get that guy, he'd be a big asset. Moving forward with Greg's other picks here, he got one of my personal favorites, Kyrie Jackson, a 6'3" corner out of Oregon, ran a decent time at the combine. He'd be the 2nd round pick there. Kyrie Jackson went from being a guy, Jenna, who early on before the combine, before everyone started looking at tape towards the end of the season, people said, "Oh, Kyrie Jackson, 4th round pick, decent 4th round pick." And I looked at his tape and I watched the Senior Bowl. I'm like, "Oh, he ain't no 4th round pick. He's probably gonna go like 3rd, maybe even 2nd." And now he is being projected to go around the 2nd round. But if the Steelers get Kyrie Jackson, the reason I really like him is because he fits the prototype of what the Steelers want to get right now. You look at what he brings. He's 6'3", he's long, he's fast. He has experience in the Pac-12. He's been really good at taking on number 1 wide receivers. And I think that's where you look at it. If you're Steelers, you want an athlete. And actually, he measured in at 6'4", I think, at the combine. So he's actually fast. And he didn't run a great 40-yard dash, but he ran enough that I think that people saw like, hey, he's going to be able to play with number 1 wide receivers, especially on the outside.
And I think that this is such a good fit in the 2nd round because this is where my mind is automatically going for this team. And it's going to be ironic if they do, for the 2nd year in a row, draft a cornerback in the 2nd round. We know the success Joey Porter Jr. has had up to this point already, but adding another guy in there who is going to be young, who is very talented, who has the versatility a little bit in this way, I think is going to round out that room. That's why I almost don't feel like the Steelers are going to make a massive push to get a corner in free agency. Granted, I could be entirely wrong, but I think that they want to have a lot of youth with this position based on just what we saw from Joey Porter Jr. this season. And I think that I like this pick a lot. And again, hopefully things shake out in the way that, it looks like it may, but in the reality is that the Steelers, this is a position that they need to fill. And I think in my mind, at least, they're going to do it through the draft. They're probably versus free agency.
Just a note here too. We've talked about relative athletic scores, which you get from RAS.football. Kent Lee Platt, he does like the numbers comparing players to players with their stats and everything. The relative athletic score of Kyrie Jackson in this draft class is a 9.7 out of 10. Excuse me. Joey Porter Jr.'s was a 9.69 last year. So like very similar things there. Now Joey Porter was a bit faster. He ran a 4.46 to Kyrie Jackson's 4.50, but Kyrie Jackson also ran a slightly faster 10-yard split, and his broad jump was about, I think, at least a foot longer than Joey Porter Jr. So he's a little bit more explosive, but doesn't have as much long range speed. That's still something I think the Steelers would be happy to take, again, with his size there. And I guess technically he is officially 6'3". He's on the plus side of 6'3", so he's almost 6'4" there. So Kyrie Jackson certainly a hit there. Let's round out the other picks here before we get out, just so we get all of Greg's picks here, because it was a really well-rounded draft, in my opinion, as far as a mock. Jeremiah Trotter, the obvious son of Jeremiah Trotter Sr., linebacker out of Clemson, a guy that used to be considered maybe a second-round pick, is kind of dropping down the boards because he didn't perform at the combine. We'll see what he does at Clemson's pro day. He's be solid there. Cedric Van Pran, a center out of Georgia. He was a guy who was also maybe looked at as maybe potentially being the best center in this class at the start of the college football season. He's dropped back to more being like the third or the fourth option. But if the Steelers sign a decent veteran in free agency, that makes a lot of sense. He also went and got Cooper Beebe, the guard out of Kansas State, cornerback Johnny Dixon out of Penn State, and finishing out the draft with a popular pick that people are picking in the 7th round this year, Torrey Taylor, the punter out of Iowa, because all they do is punt in Iowa. But in all seriousness,
picking all of this, by the way,
right? Yeah, exactly. Because they need a punter. They need somebody to get the job done there. But yes. Jenna, you look at the distribution here: tackle, corner, linebacker, center, guard, corner, punter. This seems like the kind of concentration we've been talking about that the Steelers are targeting and are realistically looking at adding in this upcoming draft class.
Yeah, and you said this seems just very balanced. This addresses a lot of the needs that the team has right now, and it makes it just one of those, like, okay, they check this box, they check this box, they check this box here, because that's what the Steelers do. Like you mentioned too, after free agency, they want to go into the draft being able to draft the best player possible and address the best player possible versus, oh shoot, we have this need here, we really need a center, we really need a corner, and we missed our guy by a couple spots. You know, we have to reach to get somebody. We have to do something in that way. They like to go into this, as most teams in the NFL do, but as prepared as possible, so they're not forced, showing their hand and being like, well, shoot, we really need this position. And I think that I like this mock draft for a variety of reasons, but I think it's very balanced, and it addresses kind of all of the needs that the Steelers have without feeling like there's, they're trading up massively and giving up this big spread to get, some guy that they might not need, or they might need too much, I should say.
Absolutely. Jenna, first of all, I say congratulations to Greg again for winning Mock Draft Monday. Again, you can all submit at the end of the week, Friday, Saturday, in that range. Check my Twitter account. I'll get it posted up, or check the Locked On Steelers Facebook group if you want to get your chance to get on the show here. Jenna, thanks so much for joining us here on the Locked On Steelers podcast. Let people can find you, follow you, and get more of your work.
Well, thank you for having me. As always, you can find me on Twitter at Jenna Harner 11, Instagram, Jenna_Harner, and locally and online at WPXI.com.
Absolutely. She's Jenna Harner. I'm Chris Carter of the Locked On Steelers podcast. You can find me at the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette, where I write about Pitt. I'll actually be in covering the ACC tournament this week, so check that out there, as well as the North Shore Drive podcast that releases every Monday, Wednesday, Friday, post-gazette.com for all of that. But as always, you can find me here on the Locked On Steelers podcast every day, Monday through Friday, talking about your Pittsburgh Steelers. We're back to talking more about your Pittsburgh Steelers right here on the Locked On Steelers podcast.